One of the questions, and it's probably what we're moving towards maybe the last question, but it's still, you obviously know I'm from the MIS world. That's where I'm from. That's what I'm quite passionate about. I think there's lots of stuff like data in there. I love the amount of data, and I think it can be used more effectively, in my personal view. And I think it's also to do with I think ultimately, and it probably is to do with the background of Sims the dominant, and we talked about innovation. I think there needs to be more innovation in the sort of MIS world, to my view, and maybe the whole of EdTech, but I think especially into the MIS world, because I think we should be using more of that data to support, basically support teachers and learners and parents to understand where their children are. There's a debate, and it is a debate, that I have with a number of, friends on this around, should we use, can we use more of the data? And I think yes, we can. Then there's the other side of it, which is actually, is there any more data apart from sensors that we need to use? And I think there is. I think there's lots of data in there. And when I spoke to, there's loads. I spoke to like Duncan Baldwin. A bunch of head teachers got together and looked at some analysis, and and found some really good trends. And Ask Eddie is another company that is also trying to support that. But I just feel that basically as an MIS, there should be, or it could be companies above, absolutely, that basically then take a line across MIS and finance and lots of other sort of products and do the analysis instead. I just feel there's a need to be a bit more imaginative, I guess, in the data analysis and be a bit more innovative and use some of the, I know some companies will say they're using AI and so on and BI, but I think there's a need to use it in a much more greater extent and less in little pockets than it is at the moment. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Okay, I'm going to do the AI first. Okay. I'm really down on AI. I see so many AI powered tools that aren't AI, they're algorithms. And I will back in the vast majority of cases, experienced analysts who are intellectually curious and familiar with the industry, building algorithms and testing hypotheses and sort of trying to sort of develop tools to sort of support and leverage those hypotheses than some sort of mystical sort of machine learning sort of nexus that will magically spit out answers that no one understands any day. Now, you talked about sort of, is there been enough innovation? I think there's been a lot of innovation in the data that's collected, although the act of collecting data can be a real pain in the neck for a school. Actually, post-pandemic, a lot more one-to-one devices out there. Is this actually an opportunity to collect more data than we've ever done before? Maybe. I think there's a question about sort of the level of aggregation of that data, and the school census is, it's aggregated at a national level. It's very helpful. But actually, at the other end, a school is completely subscale in data. Can they work out where they sit versus the rest of the country? Most of the time, they can't. In a MAT, and especially in kind of a larger MAT, you do see some really interesting tools there. I did a series of interviews with sort of MAT chief execs and data managers over the summer, sort of in between PwC and SEG, and it was really interesting to hear people talk about the way in which they use data to identify the opportunity to make improvements, or the need to understand what's going on in more detail, and then sort of what sort of levers they use to address that. And you can't just basically sort of look at a MIS dashboard and go, right, I need to do X, Y, Z. But you can say, I need to go over there and work out what's happening. And once we go over there, then we can actually think about, what tools in particular, typically behavior and assessment, can we use to change some behaviors or change some, to change the structure of motivations and incentives and so on and so forth, both for the at the educator level and at the learner level. Yep. I think that was a really interesting set of whatever it is, 12 interviews, that probably in more detail than I've ever seen, sort of exposed the way in which arguably some of the leading users of MIS data use it. So I think there's a lot there. The other thing about data is fragmentation of data is a real pain in the neck. I mean, and we're not just talking about double entry or the risk of data being different in different places, both total torture. But also I talked to a MAP chief exec yesterday who was talking about her staff HR data, and that's in the MIS business. That's the MIS tool, the payroll tool. They have a separate HR tool. They use CPOMs, it's in there. They've got an assessment tool, it's in there. And they've got single central record, although mainly on spreadsheets, and it's in there. And, actually, she wasn't even talking about sort of, double entry or sort of managing sort of the sort of single view of the data. She was talking about data security. Actually, securing all those different packages is really hard.
Yeah. Understandable.
So that's a long way of answering your question, which is, should we be more ambitious about how we use data? I think we already are being. And actually, if there's a third strand to answering that, you do see providers beginning to do more about benchmarking data. We are beginning to sort of do more within our organizations as we sort of capture and sort of systematize and analyze aggregated data over our customer base. And we serve about 12,000 schools, although not with everything we do. We can begin to sort of see some of the sort of trends and averages that let us say to a school, you know what, you're really proud of this, but actually you could be better. And actually you're sort of somewhere, you're in the middle of the second quartile. Yeah. And even though you've come a hell of a long way since 2, 3, 4 years ago when you would have been in the third quartile, there's more to do here. And here are the sorts of things that other schools do to be better at that. And I think, we can do a better job of helping schools, especially standalone schools. Within MATs, it's a little bit easier because they can sort of reference among their set. But standalone schools, we can help them to think about how they're doing, not just at the sort of classic sort of, ILR, progress 8 score type stuff. Yeah. But actually on operational issues that are in effect one step back from the outcomes. They might say, well, we think we're doing a great job, but when all's said and done, our kids just aren't doing well enough. Maybe it's because, there's a bunch of areas of, multiple deprivation around us or whatever. But we can start to say, well, actually, let's understand why that is. It are these operational things that might be what you can work on. And that gives a school, the levers that they can actually focus on. Because let's face it, a standalone school, there's a limit to how many levers a management team can pull in any particular year. It takes a hell of a lot of effort, to diagnose the issue, to communicate that it is an issue to the wider team, and then for the wider team to find time along, doing all their stuff in the classroom to actually, put in the time. You've got to be able to tie that cleanly to what's the impact.
And actually sometimes I used to talk about it with data. Now you want to go into this, and I think you could do it as your company because obviously you have a lot of reach in the sense of, because you talk to lots of different schools, and you talk to lots of different, in different demographics, I think, which is the fundamental thing. So like you said, this school over here in Liverpool, that is potentially in a deprived area, and this school in London in a deprived area. You've got some situations of the same problem. And actually what we've identified over here in Liverpool, they did these interventions and put these strategies in place. I'm not saying you have to do them, but have you considered them? It's about bringing that best practice together from multiple different angles, I guess, not just the one we just discussed there. But I agree with you. I think there's not enough of that happening.
And that's, what is it? The core of our business are a bunch of experts helping schools. A very large bunch of experts helping schools. And if we can invest in tools to help our experts to see and measure and quantify and articulate, some of the sort of trends and differences more clearly to their customers, then we will do an even better job of doing that. Years ago, I ran a workshop in Pearson, 7-8 years ago, and it was when they were investing in Newton.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. About which, yeah, well, okay. And what we took a slightly sort of, I don't know, counterpoint view of what can you get out of one of these sort of magical black box sort of data, AI, machine learning-y things. And we sort of said, well, actually, let's not start from what data you put in, which I think too many people do. Let's start with what are the levers you can pull in the classroom at the end. And I think we got to 4.5 levers. Fundamentally, you can say, okay, I'm going to sit, you can say to a learner, okay, I'm going to sit down and explain something to you. Yeah. Or you can say, okay, go read this content, go consume this content. Maybe that's assessment content, but go plug yourself into some content. Go work in a group with people who, and I know none of you understand it, or go work in a group with people where we know some people understand it. And the kind of half was, discipline, which is an important lever. And if you sort of work backwards from those levers, what will trigger these things? You end up with, probably not the best possible map, because there's a sort of trade-off between complexity and actionability, but effectively a decision tree. So instead of a black box where you've got no idea why it's saying what it's saying, you can sort of see the sort of process. And actually, we found that was potentially far easier to articulate to a teacher. Now, can it be streamlined? Do you really want to work through a complex decision tree? No. Then if you know what the decision tree underpinning the recommendation is, it's a lot easier to have faith in the recommendation rather than, oh, it's a magic black box. We collected 20 million data points and it said X.
Yeah, so I suppose it's like the what they used to be, those things where you put a sixpence in, and then the magic person basically give you a card and said, this is what your life's going to be like. You're right. Well, there's a movie about it as well. I think it's big, isn't it? But it's that sort of thing, moving away from that.
If you're providing, whether you're providing a human recommendation or a Edtech-led recommendation, it's really powerful to be able to explain how you got to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And now typically a human will do a better job of explaining than a piece of software.
And actually, strangely enough, the people who we're selling this, selling Edtech to, absolutely do that as part of their job. They explain exactly, how they want people to explain how they got to, the students, how they got to the conclusion. So their expectation is probably going to be from Edtech. How do you get to that conclusion? It sort of seems a natural thing, actually, almost from the types of personas. I'm gonna. This might be a little bit unfair, so I apologise up front. But I'm gonna effectively ask you to almost summarise a little bit. But if there were 3 things that you're going to talk to, if you were going to talk to a new, either a startup or to an existing company that they should be doing now to future-proof their business, what are those 3 things that you would talk about?
Okay, so I think one, I'd go back to this use case piece. Absolutely, work out, what is it that you're going to actually let people do, and help people to do, and what is it that might be adjacent, or the second, or the third, or the fourth use case you do, but that you're not doing today.
Yeah.
And who are you actually competing with in each use case? And rather than thinking about, well, our main competitor is X. If the competitors aren't different per use case, you're probably not looking at your competitor set right. So number one, do everything at a use case level. Critical. Number 2, selling to schools is a complete pain in the neck. It's really hard. It's changing a lot. If you're selling a kind of £10,000 per year product, presuming that your product is that valuable, then it kind of works itself out. If you're selling something that's sub £1,500 per year, and definitely if selling something that's sub £1,000 a year, it's horrific. And you should think very carefully about what you're actually doing, how you're going to do that, and the degree to which referrals or content marketing or partnerships can take you away from a really bad sort of set of unit economics around inside sales and face-to-face sales. And thirdly, I would say, I think the third one would be, I think it's really hard to find the right team structure for an edtech startup. And in particular, it's hard to find the right mix of expertise and cost effectiveness. So I think you've got to find people who are really, you've got to find people who are both sort of super experienced and can sort of be a sort of, I'm not going to say a sort of fount of wisdom, because, sometimes there's enough change in this space that wisdom can take you down the wrong road sometimes, or legacy wisdom can take you down the wrong road sometimes. Yeah. But I think you've got to work out how you have people who are going to sort of guide versus people who are going to pedal versus people who can sort of self-learn and adjust and so on and so forth, and mixing that together in a culture is, I think, really interesting and challenging and completely vital.
No, I think that's really, really good advice. I'm going to add one more, which you did mention, and I was going to use it, but I was waiting to see. It is reduce friction. Try and make it easy for your customers to buy from you. Try and reduce all that friction of, purchase to awareness to, to the point of getting to value. Try and reduce that friction for sure.
I mean, if you look at some of the most successful, as in fast-growing tools, in the edtech ecosystem, and I think maybe CPOMs, given its recent sale, is a very good example of that. It started as a really simple product. It started as a filing cabinet in the cloud. Yeah. They then added a bunch of workflow to. Then they added some analysis to, and it became actually, it sort of started off as something that sort of was kind of an anti-embarrassment product for schools, and really important for safeguarding and so on and so forth. But became something that fundamentally let schools do something better. Whereas it started off by saying, we'll let you do what you do in an easier way, and with more likelihood that you don't drop any balls. Yeah. And then went from that to, and we'll start helping you to do things that you couldn't possibly do if you were doing things the old way. And that was a, call it 10-year journey to 13-ish thousand schools. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. And it started with being very clear about making one thing that was very painful for schools a lot better. And then.
I think you're right. I think sometimes people or create what they perceive as a great product in the sense of technically they think it's a great product, but actually it's not making the lives of the user any easier. And in which case, then why would you buy it? So I think, yeah, absolutely. I firmly agree with you.
The other thing is, I looked at an MIS product the other day. Actually, looks like a really good product. Really good product. And it's really exciting they've got a good product, but it's, such a challenging journey they've got ahead of them. And in part they think, lovely guys, they think they've had the hard journey to get to this point, with a couple of, false starts, having to go back and nail the product. They've nailed the product. Actually, the hard stuff still to come. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, they're getting themselves out there, building the awareness, is going to be a challenge for sure, because it is a saturated market, and the challengers as they stand at the moment are finding it hard one way or another. They're not. It's not. There's growth, absolutely, and is the world changing? Yes, absolutely, but it's not growing as fast as anybody would probably like. So there's still a challenge to be had for sure, without a shadow of a doubt. Ian, a big thank you. It's been amazing talking to you. I think there's been loads and loads for people to digest, and especially those final 3 points. I think that's really important for people in startups to understand. If you're coming into this marketplace, really do take into consideration those 3 points that Ian's been talking about. So a big thank you to you. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. By the way, it's been brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
You too.